Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming at you live from episode 58 of Life on the Rocks with your host, Connor LaRocque. Today's featured guest in the hot seat is a special one, is my friend Terry Lipovski. How you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Connor. Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate that.
Oh, anytime. For anybody who doesn't know Terry on my network, so Terry is the president of Ubiquity Coaching. He's an executive coach, one of the best I've ever met and talked with, always a positive guy. He's the host of the Inspiring Leaders podcast, which he's interviewed some top minds in Canada, across the world as well. He is also a TEDx presentation coach. So you wonder how some of these TEDx presentations are very well done. Terry does a lot of the coaching on one end of it. He is also, and I thought this was very interesting, has worked formerly with Apple. So we're going to get into that as we go. For anybody that, before we get started here, I also want to say the last thing is that Terry also, you work in group exercises. So you focus on culture, strategic leadership, a number of different things. So the most important question is, what got you started in business, Terry?
Wow, what got me started in business? Connor, I actually didn't get started in business. I got started in psychology.
Oh, wow.
I wanted to be Bob Newhart. I wanted to go out and help people that were having challenges getting to where they wanted to be. And so I started my career in that field, quickly discovered that it was a lot more challenging than I thought. And it's not for the faint of heart to work with people in that regard. So I ended up sort of doing a detour into business at the suggestion of one of my psychologist friends, and haven't looked back. Really enjoyed it. Now, all of the work that I'm doing now in coaching and in corporate development, strategic planning, this sort of thing, that all came about because while I was working for some great companies along the way, you mentioned Apple, I also worked for Bell, I worked for Rogers. When I was working for them, I saw some great people that didn't necessarily always have the best practices. I saw some people that would be wonderful if you could get them out on a golf course or for lunch, but if you saw them interact with their teams, it wasn't a pretty thing. Now, this wasn't everybody. It was only a small subset, but I kept realizing that there's no manual for leadership. There's really nowhere out there where people can go and say, that's how to do it. That's all the options that I've got. This is the best practice. So I dedicated myself to trying to help people find that.
Right. And so how long have you been running your company for? Like in general, like as you start to get into Ubiquity leadership, like how long has that been going?
It's been going on a long time in many different forms. It was a numbered company for quite a few years. I used to do Dale Carnegie speaker training back in the 90s. I was working with some colleagues throughout the 2000s and kind of a part-time role, I guess you'd call it, spending my evenings and days off doing coaching with people over the phone in different countries. And then I was also taking vacations to help other coaches run workshops and leadership training as well. All of it kicked in about 2012, 2013, when I went full-time and I decided enough of trying to help somebody else reach their vision. I want to try to reach this vision of bringing inspired leadership everywhere, like air, which is why we call it Ubiquity, because it's everywhere.
I love that. I think that's honestly a great name too. And I think it's one of those things where if you have terrible leadership, you're not going to get anywhere. You take like a Navy SEAL example. A lot of the time they always say there's no such thing as a bad unit. It's always a bad leader, somebody going forward, and they show a lot of things. What do you find is one of the most difficult parts of coaching? Because I know as a coach, there's so many different facets and you deal with so many different minds. What is probably one of the most difficult parts of trying to get someone from point A to point B?
You know what? Really good question. And I'm actually going to bring it right back to you because I was so impressed with one of the books that you've written, Mindset is Everything. I love it. I've got a few copies here. I give them out to people that I really care about, including my clients and my own kids. I find that one of the biggest things that hold organizations back is the perspective and the mindset of the leader. A great example of where this is going on is Microsoft. Microsoft was really a dominant factor in high tech and in software for many years. But then what happened was they started sort of coasting on what they've done. And a lot of other startups started coming up and eating their lunch. And they realized that they needed to change their culture, which meant having to get every single employee to change their mindset, which is why I bring it back to Mindset is Everything, your book. So they really had to work hard to try to get everybody into this growth mindset. accepting that small failures are a good thing, leading to growth, stepping outside their comfort zone, trying new things, and becoming even better.
No, I think that's huge. And I think that's one of the biggest points. You look at all the fundamentals of what makes a unit good and a team. And I think that mindset really is important because, I mean, we all have the same 24 hours in a day, right? And it's a matter of what you're going to do with it. And I mean, it seems that the general culture we live in today is kind of programmed negatively. So I want to talk about it. So what got you in? So we're talking from a generalistic point, but then going into executive coaching, high level. What made you go into that facet of business? Is it that you've seen that these people were already performing at a high capacity and it made sense? Let's see if we can make them that much better? Or just talk to me about that.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what I already mentioned, in that I started off in psychology, and
Right.
I got to give you a couple of, just to set the stage, I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I was working with some people that were at a very low functioning level. I went in to do some work with one particular gentleman, and there was a 3-inch bulletproof glass between he and I, and armed guards standing around us at the ready. This guy was an absolute, and I mean literally, a killer. So I had to work with this guy, left from that appointment and went to a halfway house where my next client was a suicidal girl. I met with her in this bedroom in this halfway house, no curtains on the windows, no shade on the lamp, no sheets on the bed. Anything that she could kill herself with had to be removed. Wow. I realized that day that I didn't have the stomach to work with people that were at that level. I have so much respect for people that do, Connor, I can't tell you. But I realized that my future lay more with people that were higher functioning, that were doing well, that had high aspirations, and that wanted to do even more. Here's why. When you get somebody that's responsible for a team or an organization or a community, what they have is they have something called influence. And it's that metaphor that I use on my website. It's that image of one drop hitting the water and all of the ripple effects going across. If you can get somebody to a best practice, one leader, the impact that they can have on their team, on their colleagues, on their organization, on their clients, on their industry, it's incredible. It is the best ROI that any organization can spend. When you start getting a leader who really takes it seriously and invests in their people and sets the stage for success, all of a sudden you've got people who are focused, engaged, dedicated, motivated. You have clients that are wanting to come back, tell other clients. You have investors that want to get in on this and they want to be part of it. Like I said, that ripple effect, that's what motivated me. That's what gets me into coaching.
I think that's huge. And I think that's super significant. And you see the impact you've had even with your podcast alone, getting different perspectives. One of the most important things I want to ask you, talking about corporate culture and just in general, how do you break through the noise of some of these egos? Because we know as you get higher up in different titles and things like that, there's a lot of ego that's clashing in that culture. What are some things that you utilize or just try to work with people to kind of get your ideas to resonate so that you can help them move forward and show that you're not just trying to show your dominance, you're trying to help better the company?
Yeah, and I don't go in with a hammer. And I've worked with some people in the past that have said, Terry, I want to work with you because I want to hammer my people, or I want to hammer my colleagues, or I want to hammer my board. And usually my response is, how's that been working out for you? Because it doesn't seem to work very well from an interpersonal perspective in general. So, maybe it's a good way to go short term in some cases, especially when the stakes are really high and the deadlines are tight. Well, that's when you've got to come in with a more commanding approach. But I think the thing that's really kind of helped me is to raise people's awareness of what is. When people start to see that there are problems that are getting in the way from where they would like to be and where they're at, and if we can really shine a real light on that and really understand what's happening, then we can start making plans and brainstorming about what can we do to move the needle. I usually don't come in with a prescription. I work with people from a more psychological point of view or more of a peer point of view to help them brainstorm and help get the most out of them. They know their business, they know their industry. I know how to get more out of people. I know how to help get people out of their comfort zone and into that growth zone that's optimal for them so that they can dig out what options they've got. And then, of course, I help project manage it. So I'll help people to figure out, okay, you committed to doing this last time. Where are we at with this? Did it get done? Or is that still something that you need to do? How much does this really matter to you if week after week that's not getting done? So if I'm there to help ask those hard questions and keep pushing people to what they've decided they want to do, where they want to go, then people start making progress. It's the same. I mean, Connor, you're a pretty ripped guy. You're an in-shape guy, right? I don't know if you've ever worked with a personal trainer. A lot of people have. Why do you work with a personal trainer? Because you know that you've got to get outside of your comfort zone to get high performance. When you're in a workplace, in order to get that high performance, you need to build certain things. One of the absolute biggest things that seems to be really missing in organizations today, it's a little 5-letter word called trust.
Right.
And trust is a foundation. If we don't have trust in an organization, then nobody's going to offer up thoughts. Nobody's going to come up with innovative ideas for fear of getting shot down, for fear of their ideas being stolen, for fear of ridicule. So you got to work past that. You have to set a really good foundation of trust. Once you've got that, people will collaborate. People will start engaging in friendly conflict. What I mean by that is they'll challenge each other, but not to shoot you down. They'll challenge each other in order to build on what you're saying, to build on your ideas, or to see something that you haven't seen before and point it out, but all in the spirit of advancing things towards a common vision. And that's really healthy when we start getting there. That's where people will start saying, I want to be accountable for taking this initiative forward, and I'm willing to commit to getting the certain result. And if people are at that level, then all of a sudden you start seeing organizations transforming and really moving forward.
I think that's one of the greatest things too about yourself is that you have your perspective on life in a general sense is that you're always trying to better yourself and you're always trying to change. And that's where you see a lot of companies sometimes will go under because they don't have that changing perspective. They kind of quote unquote get stuck in the mud. So it's nice to see somebody like you going in there and kind of getting to the root of the problem, i.e. figure out the vision and then really kind of hash that out to help them get that much better. So I want to ask you, like, being that you've worked with organizations like Apple and TEDx, those two are some of the strongest brands in the world, one for speaking, the other one obviously for technology. What have you noticed that they implement in their culture and their design that makes them super successful?
You know what? I'm glad you asked that because there's some secret sauce that I think some organizations have developed and other organizations just don't know about it. And again, it comes back to what I said before. There's no manual out there to say, here's the way to do it. You have to really access people who make it their full-time job and their reason for being by going out there, learning about what's going on, like the example that I just gave you from Microsoft. They are doing some fantastic things with changing their culture. And I got to tell you, I'm more impressed with what's happening at Microsoft than I ever have been. It's an exciting environment and I'm really impressed with them. So here's something that you mentioned, Apple, that I worked 4.5, almost 5 years with Apple. Now, although I was involved in the corporate side, the corporate sales, helping organizations get the technology solutions that they needed, helping to support them, there was something that was done on the retail side. And I got to share this with you because it's fabulous. It's something called friendly feedback. Now, I mentioned before this thing about trust being absolutely foundational. Well, they came up with this concept and every single employee, and I think there's over 120,000 employees for this organization across the planet. You know, all those Apple stores, they've got over 100 employees at each one. So friendly feedback is reinforced to them as they're hired. They're told and expected that they're going to be offering friendly feedback and receiving friendly feedback from their peers. This isn't just something that if they see something that is questionable from a fellow employee, they don't just sit back and say, you know what, HR will take care of that. No, because HR is not in every one of those Apple stores out there. So they rely on the employees to bring this up and support a culture of trust. So friendly feedback goes like this. They have to first make question themselves about their own intention. They have to sit back and think, wait a minute, something happened. Am I angry about that and I'm going to lash out? Or is there really a higher purpose that I'm after here in bringing this forward? So they question their own intention. Then they come to the other person, and out of respect, they show respect. They say to the other person, hey, I've got some feedback for you. Is now a good time? The other person has the obvious option of saying, you know what, I'm a little busy right now. Now's not a good time. And they can respond saying, well, look, it is important. What is a good time? Let's chat later. So that may happen. They'll come to them after that and they'll say, listen, I saw this happen with this client. You were with a customer out on the floor and then you walked away and left them there for 5 minutes. I was just wondering what happened. And they'll share their intention. You know what? In the spirit of good customer service, I was just curious to find out what happened. The other person can then share what happened from their perspective. And usually it's something simple like, you know what? They asked me about where they could get something that we don't carry. So I made a couple phone calls for them. I told them that I'd be back in about 6-7 minutes. I did, and we ended up resolving it for them.
Right.
That way, the employee can not only be responsible for maintaining that level of trust and that culture of trust, but it actually helps reinforce it right throughout the organization. Everybody becomes empowered. And that's a really, really good little secret sauce that Apple uses.
I've actually never heard of that, but I like that, kind of like an open-end policy that would empower your employees, that they actually have a say. In a lot of organizations, I see that seems to be a kind of an ongoing problem, that people think, it doesn't matter if they complain, nothing's going to get heard, right?
Right.
I find it fascinating. I wanted to ask you, being that you've interviewed so many people, what are like a number of different leadership type people, what do you find is a common thread you find among these leaders? Like, they have similar rituals? Is there like, talking about secret sauce, is there something specific to them? Or are they all just like, what's the secret, if I were to say in the most blatant term?
You know what? I interviewed a guy who was brilliant. He was an author of a book called Mindset is Everything. And I just found this guy to be, I'm trying to remember, Connor, what was the episode that we, I think it was one of the earlier episodes. It was within maybe our first 10 or 15 episodes that I interviewed you. And it got so many hits. It got so many people listening to it. It was really cool. Folks, if you're listening to this right now, you got to check out the Inspiring Leaders podcast and look for the episode with Connor, because he did a fantastic job and the message is really good. As far as the message that I hear most commonly, I would say that most of the people that come on, when I ask them the same question every single time, what has inspired leadership to you? And I keep hearing people say it's about having a good idea of what the vision is, really having understood it well and communicating it, owning it well and communicating it well to your team, and then setting that stage so that everybody else can be successful. And I think this is the trap. The trap that most leaders get in is that they're promoted because they were skillful, because they got things done. They shook the tree and got the fruit to fall. They did all of these things where they just poured themselves into getting it done. But when they become promoted and they become responsible for a team, there's a book out there that describes this really well. And the book title is What Got You There, or What Got You Here Won't Get You There. You really have to change your mindset. You have to change your perspective. You're no longer responsible for the results. Now you're responsible for the people that get the results. And you have to help those people to become as successful as they can. That doesn't mean doing all of the stuff to get all of the roadblocks out of their way, although it could. But mostly it means supporting them and helping to elevate their skill level so that they can get some of those things out of the way and they can overcome some of those obstacles. That's how you get other people up to another level that's going to take the organization into a transformation.
I think that's a great point. I think you're right on the money with that too. And that's a pinnacle of how to get companies to move forward and everything like that. I got to ask you though, so we're talking about a number of different leadership individuals. Who are some of the people that you invest your time into? Because I know obviously we're in a generation full of noise, that, online there's a select few influencers you can really follow. They have a good track record, but a lot of time it seems like there's just a lot of noise. Who are some of the people that have inspired you and you use some of their tools and resources that you apply to your everyday training and everything else?
You know what? That's a really good question. And I have to say, my mindset has shifted a little bit. I probably would have identified a few people along the way. I kind of go back to maybe some of the more historical people.
Right.
You know, Gandhi, Churchill, Martin Luther King Jr. There have been some amazing leaders over the years that have really helped inspire me, and my bookshelf is filled with biographies because I love biographies. You know, even guys like Bob Marley. Bob
Right.
Marley, most people think, was this guy a leader? Absolutely, he was a leader. Not only was he a leader in the music industry, almost creating a whole new form of music called reggae, but this guy came from the ghettos of Jamaica and rose to the absolute pinnacle of stardom. You know, how do you do that? You do that by overcoming your own hardships. This, you know, people tried to take him out. There was an assassination attempt on his life, and he was shot. And he overcame all of that, just as Nelson Mandela did, just as Gandhi did, overcame all of that and put all of those emotions aside and got on with inspiring people and lifting people up, right? One love and all that good stuff. He
Right.
actually took two different party leader hands during a political election, and it was dividing the country. He brought them up on stage and actually joined their hands together and united an entire nation when he did that. So that's leadership. Now, having said that, I think my whole perspective has been changed a little bit. It has less to do with individuals and it has more to do with ideals. When I hear ideals like servant leadership, you know, feeding your team first so that they can be successful, that'll make you successful. Building other people up to be the mountains so that the water flows back down to you. Those are the concepts that I think really inspire me. When I hear people like Dwayne Cummings, the CEO of LeaderCast, and Dwayne talks about inverting his hierarchy of his organization. So the CEO is at the bottom, the executive team is above them, and then all of the other frontline people are above those leaders because the leaders are there to serve the people. That is a really cool concept. And I love it when I hear leaders talking about their teams that way, talking about their organizations that way, because usually when they do, you look at their profit sheet and it's taking off.
Right. No, absolutely. They're empowered. I think that's actually a really great perspective, similar to Simon Sinek. I'm assuming, obviously, you start with why, and he talks about leaders eat last, and he has a very similar approach talking about that. One of the last questions I want to ask you, this is a very interesting one. So we talk about leadership, right? So I don't get political. I try to avoid getting political, but it almost seems if you look at the political spectrum, a lot of these leaders, and I don't mean to call it out, but a lot of them are very narcissistic in a number of ways, right? And talking about culture in companies putting themselves below. So like the CEO puts himself below some of their other employees. Talk about how the political sphere, like trying to buy into these people when do you really think they're out for your best interest in a number of ways? If that's their approach, they're kind of narcissistic. You know what I'm trying to say with that?
I
It's something
do, and
really,
it's a
really
big
thinking about.
challenge. Here's why
Really?
it's a big challenge from my perspective. If I'm working with somebody, if I've got a corporation that phones me up or sends me an email, they say, we want you to work with Jimmy. And I get on the phone with Jimmy, and Jimmy's got one of those big egos that you just described.
Right. Yeah.
He's almost sort of tripping over himself, right? Enough about me. Let's talk about me. That kind of a perspective, right? Then usually that kind of person is very difficult, if not impossible, to work with.
Totally.
I have fired coaching clients because they couldn't get over themselves. They couldn't get around themselves. I've said to them, look, we're kind of wasting time here. I think it's probably better if I just, detach here and let you move forward. Now, having said that, that's kind of a last ditch thing. If I usually try not to do that. Usually what I will do is when I'm working with these people, I will try to help them to identify what makes them unique and what makes them strong. Now, here's why. It's called strengths-based coaching. So if I'm working with somebody, well, let's put it this way: who gets promoted and who gets hired? It's people that it's not the people that worked on their deficiencies to bring them up to par, because nobody wants to hire mediocrity.
Right.
Nobody wants to hire average. Nobody will promote it. So it's the people who are standout, the people who are really strong, head and shoulders above everybody else. So when I start working with somebody whose ego is really getting in their way, I'll start working with them to try to identify what they're strong at and what they're unique at. Then we build on those things. We build on their strengths to make them even better. And while we're doing that, I will try to highlight and showcase examples of people who have a lower ego that do other things that will help them. And in showcasing that while we're working on their strengths, then usually they'll start to get the idea and they'll start to come around a little bit. Now, if that doesn't work and even firing them doesn't work, sometimes I'll have a talk with their board or with their CEO, and I'll say, listen, you may have to, you might want to take another look at this, because, you know, a 360 assessment or something like that, it might open some eyes.
No, it's so true. And I think you might find this an interesting perspective. The gentleman I had on the show last week, his name's Jay Duran. He's one of the best people I know in terms of culture.
Great interview.
Yeah, absolutely. And he always said it like this. He says, hire character and train the rest. You hire, so you find that. So in a lot of cases, I don't know if you agree with that.
I do.
I think he's right, because I mean, obviously some people like, and this is where the education system, we could really digress on this and get into it, but this is where there's a couple flaws where it's like we graduate university and then you can't find a job. It's like, well, you need to have 4 years experience, but then you're like, well, I just did my 4 years, right? So it's kind of backwards in that way. But I wanted to touch on that with Jay, so I thought that was interesting. So hire character and then train the rest, and that's probably the best thing I see with you.
I agree with that. I'll just add one thing. I don't think it's as black and white as maybe some people will present it to be. There's got to be a little bit of a gray area in there. You've got to look for people who have those competencies, who have developed themselves a little bit. But I absolutely agree, that whole character thing, it's more important in the team dynamic, in the culture, and ultimately that's what you're trying to protect when you're hiring new people.
So true. No, honestly, I think you're right on the money with that. I want to transition my last question. This is the most important one, and this is the secret, Terry. What is the secret and the trick to getting into TEDx? I've applied a number of times, been rejected. It's not a big deal. I will eventually get in. But being that you've been a presenter, coach, and you've been involved in the culture, the environment, for anyone watching this, they're going to want to know, what is one of the secrets to get into TEDx?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That's a good one,
I'm going to say two things. Probably the number one thing that you need if you're going to apply for TEDx is have something that you will benefit the audience with. Have something that the audience is going to leave there going, holy smokes, I'm so glad that I listened to Connor. If you can do that, you're going to raise eyebrows and you're going to get people's attention. Right. Obviously, the style of what you present and all that sort of thing is really important. The second thing that I think is really, really important, don't sell. If you're going up on that stage to promote your business or promote your product, don't even bother trying, because the people who are evaluating, the people who are selecting the speakers, they'll see straight through that. They get thousands of applications. They're looking through so many. They have so many options. They won't take those. It's just not something that TEDx wants.
Right. No, I think those are great points. And that's another thing. Obviously, from that platform, it's a very educational one. You don't want to be sitting there, oh, plug in my brand here. It's like, no, that's going to be a great brand equity eventually, but that's not one of those platforms. Last question I want to ask you today is very important. So being that you're a coach, I mean, this is something you deal with on a daily basis, getting people over fear. So let's talk in the public speaking realm. Most people, you would say a majority, are very scared to do public speaking. How do you help people get over that barrier of fear in their life as a coach?
Oh, there's a few good ways. You mentioned Simon Sinek a little while ago, and I just saw a great video by Simon Sinek where he talks about reinterpreting the signals in your body, the nervousness. All of that is nothing more than energy, right? It's adrenaline. You're going to stand up in front of a whole bunch of people. High risk situation equals adrenaline. So when you start feeling the butterflies in the stomach, just reinterpret that as something exciting, a real opportunity. If you start thinking about it like a real opportunity, it's the difference between driving down the road and staring at the ditch. Where do you think you're going to end up? In the ditch. Instead, drive down the road and stare way down the road, and it'll keep you running straight and true.
Right. No, I think that's a great point. I think that's honestly a good aspect, kind of getting kind of deep inside yourself when you're experiencing those levels of fear and cortisol. So one of the last things I want to ask you then, so being that you have your podcast going, you're running your coaching business, what can we expect next from you? So for people in my audience watching and eventually going to be following you, what can they expect next from you? What do you got on the agenda?
You know what? That's a really good question. I think probably from the coaching side, one of the things that seems to be coming up a lot is succession planning. We've got a lot of baby boomers and people that are running a business that are looking at retiring or getting out or becoming a quiet owner that's collecting a profit. and they want to bring somebody in that's going to be able to maintain their vision, maintain momentum, maintain that influence with the external world. So I end up coming in to do a lot of work with people on succession planning and onboarding. So that's really keeping me busy, and I'm seeing that ramp up quite a bit. Another thing that you mentioned, obviously the TEDx thing, I do a lot of presentation coaching. And what I'm seeing from a lot of senior leaders in the federal government, CEOs, this sort of thing is they're sick of people reading their iPhone down on their lap while they're talking. So, I mean, let's face it, when you're doing a presentation, that's a serious moment. That's a touch point. So you want to make the most of that opportunity. So what I do is I help people get rid of the podium, use more of a TEDx storytelling model, even in business presentations, and really engage their audience. And then we take it a whole other level. And what I mean by that is we start looking at their speaking engagements and their touch points that they're going to have with their team, their stakeholders, their investors, all of it over the next year. And we start looking at branding them. We start looking at how they can get their major message, their overall vision out to people. And depending on the audience, we'll take different modules and plug it into what they're going to say, or take certain other modules out because it's not going to fit that audience. That's really cool work. When you start working on executive presence and branding with people, that's what really transforms a leader from being a manager into a significant leader.
I think that's a great point. And honestly, I think that's actually very interesting from a branding perspective. It's something I'm very passionate about, that a lot of people don't realize in this generation, that, build yourself a personality brand. It's like, that's how I built my career in a number of ways and got into other companies, is that people see you online. And even that's how we met. We connected on LinkedIn just through like that. You had your brand, and then all of a sudden you interviewed me, vice versa, right? I think that's one of the biggest points. So for anyone out there, Terry, where can we find you online? So I know you have your website, your LinkedIn. So talk it right into the microphone. So people, when they're looking to find you, where can they find you?
Probably the best way is just at my website, which is ubiquity.coach. Ubiquity is Ubiquity. Did I spell that right?
I think so.
Ubiquity.coach. Or you can just email me at terry@ubiquity.coach. That'll get to me. But yeah, if there's anything that if I can leave one parting idea with people, I think that I would say this: setting goals is absolutely important. If people are not setting goals, remember that hope is not a strategy. You need to be out there goal setting, but make sure that you take that goal and keep it flexible, because the whole world is changing around us. And chances are, by the time you get closer to that goal, the whole playing field is going to change. Leave some flexibility and focus on the journey. The enjoyment of your life is through the journey. The thing that you'll respect about yourself most when you're 99, sitting on your rocking chair, thinking back over your life, is how you dealt with the journey itself. So that's the big thing I wanted to mention.
I think that's great advice for anyone else out there. That's going to be my snippet I'm going to cut and put on Instagram. Honestly, Terry, you've done an exceptional job in your business and with your coaching. Eventually, we're going to do some collaborations together. You can mark my words on that. You are a true gentleman.
I welcome it.
I really appreciate having you on the show this afternoon. So for anyone else out there, Terry is tagged in here. I'm going to put his website in the link. I can't thank you enough, my friend. Thank you for coming on the show.
Right on. Thanks, Connor. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
We'll talk to you soon. Wait for